Thank you very much. Wow.
Illegal immigration was a deciding issue in last week's election.
We're going to fix our borders. We're going to fix everything about our country.
And President Trump has pledged to take swift action on the border as soon as he takes office.
The president-elect is vowing to carry out what he calls the largest deportation effort in American history. The tougher border policies gain traction among many voters, but his election is also causing fear and uncertainty among desperate migrants.
So as part of our ongoing series on the topic, we are talking to journalists, border guards, and political insiders about exactly what the problems are and what's going to happen moving forward. Todd Bensman, thank you so much for being with us today. We have a lot to talk to you about. I first want to start with your bona fides. Senior National Security Fellow for the Center of Immigration Studies, or CIS. Also a journalist of 23 years. For nearly a decade, you led counterterrorism intelligence operations for the Texas Department of Public Safety's Intelligence and Counterterrorism Division, which is a mouthful. And recently, you've come back from the Darien Gap. We were talking a little bit about that, which I want to get into. But maybe just first, just some boring, what does the Center for Immigration Studies, CIS, do?
Sure. Well, the center is probably the oldest think tank. It's a public policy institute that deals just with immigration. It produces reports and blogging and communications and education for everybody and anybody who is interested in the subject of immigration policy, legal and illegal. A lot of what I do is border security, because I live here in Texas, and the illegal immigration part.
Do you think there's a major lack of understanding amongst the public and politicians when it comes to the border? And if so, what do you think people don't understand?
Yeah, I think there's a huge gap between reality and perception on that issue. For one thing, just for starters, immigration policy is extremely complicated. People do not readily understand what policies are in place or what they do. And so that makes it very easy for both sides to, throw something out there that is not very easy to verify for most people. And so, both sides will throw mud and get away with it. You have large swaths of the public being told something that is completely untrue.
Like what? What, for example, are they being told it's untrue?
Well, for example, I'd say the classic example is, what caused it? Why did this suddenly happen? And,
what caused it?
You'll hear the Democrats say, well, there's just more movement in the global bloodstream than ever before. And so, of course, some of it's just going to happen to siphon off over to the United States. And it's, there's climate change and floods and hurricanes and this and that happened that all of a sudden drove it in January of 2021. Another one is that everybody that's coming across, all these millions of people that are coming across, are all definitely fleeing for their lives. That they are coming here to, for safety, even though many of them have crossed 5 other safe countries first. But that's a big misconception. That's not the case. And that's not mostly the case.
It's not mostly the case that they're fleeing because of safety or because they've come through 5 countries.
That they're fleeing to reach safety, that their lives are in danger. And so we absolutely must reach out and give them all a hand because otherwise they'll die. And we can't deport them either.
There's 3 statements there that I want to talk about. One is that they're fleeing and otherwise they'll die. 2 is that they've sometimes come through as many as 5 countries or getting to Chile and then coming all the way up. And then also you testified in front of Congress about Chinese illegal immigrants.
A record-smashing 50,000 Chinese nationals have crossed the southern border since Biden entered office and stood up policies that mainline them into interior America within 48 hours.
So now basically the mix of illegal immigrants that are coming is not just, let's say, from Mexico or Central America. Now it's coming from sub-Saharan Africa, from China, from a lot of countries that we hadn't seen before. So I don't know in what order you want to tackle those, but let's talk about, how about we do it this way: safety and legal immigration and the correlation there, how they're coming, the trail, how many countries it is, and why is that mix different?
Right. Well, first of all, I'll, as part of my bona fides, I'll mention that, I have spent a good amount of time of the last 4 years really with the immigrants. I'm a primary source kind of guy. I like to talk to the immigrants. I've interviewed thousands of them, and I always ask the same questions over and over again until eventually I become a believer in a certain common narrative. The primary reason that most of the ones that I've talked to, and again, that's thousands, I don't count it, but it's definitely thousands that are coming, is because we accept them at the border and admit them immediately with no asks in return, really, except that they voluntarily report to ICE at some point in the future in the city of their choice. That policy right there is extraordinary. We have never had a policy like that. Number two is the vast majority of all of those that I've interviewed say that they're coming because they want to work, they want to make money, they want to upgrade their lifestyles. It's an economic motivation. That's almost always the very first thing out of their mouths on the trails.
But isn't that, like, that's America? I mean, America, people come because they want to work, they want to make, that's literally the American dream.
Absolutely. Uh, and no, nobody can really blame them. I mean, I don't blame the average immigrant for taking advantage of a policy that's going to let them in. You've got like almost a 90 to 100% chance of actually achieving the end result. So I can't, condemn them for that, but we have laws and we have a legal system that is trying to maintain viability.
Before we get into the metaphysics of it, let's get into the nuts and bolts. So you've reported on this. There's kind of a new migrant trail, if you will, which takes more countries than we think. How are they getting here?
In this particular mass migration event, we're seeing something really different, which are the highest percentages ever of foreign nationals that are coming from countries other than Mexico and Central America. They're coming from 160 other different countries in the world. 45 to 50% of everybody hitting that border is not from Mexico or Central America anymore. Typically, those people will fly to some location in South America. Ecuador has an almost visa-free policy. And then from there, they'll go to Colombia and then move in through the Darien Gap, which is where I just came from.
So just to be clear, what is the Darien Gap, just so people know?
Yeah, the Darien Gap is about a 70 mile chunk of jungle wilderness that separates the Colombian road from the Panamanian road. There's no road in between there, so it just becomes like trails all through there, and it takes anywhere from 2 days, 3 days of hiking to maybe as long as a week. It's like a pulse. You can put your finger on it and tell what's about to happen to the United States, because all of them are going to the U.S.
How do they get the money? That's, because when I talk to you, Benin and Dagestan and Togo, they don't seem like rich countries. Like, how are the people getting to Chile and then getting through the Darien Gap and then getting up and paying the coyotes to get them across and all this business?
Well, one thing that I've noticed is that a lot of those really far foreign nationals, they call them extracontinentals, are wealthy in their home countries. They are well educated, and they have the money to pay for these trips. The Chinese are incredibly well resourced. The ones that are able to do it also, if they're not wealthy and elite in their home countries, have relatives in the United States who are doing pretty well and are smart about what the policies are at the US border, and they're telling their friends and family, everybody's getting in right now. We'll pay the smuggler for you, and you can pay us back with interest later. So all different ways, but a lot of what I would regard as elite, well-educated people from all over the world who just want to upgrade,
But if they're
to the
elite, if
US.
they're elite and well educated and have money and are coming here to work, why is it such a big issue? Why do we care?
Right. Well, again, there is an issue about what nations do, what the norm is. And
Mm.
the norm is that, you know, no nation that I'm aware of, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, just says anybody who can get here gets in,
Mm.
except one country, and that's the United States decided to become this big social experiment for 3 years,
Mm.
3.5 years to just suddenly, we're going to let just about everybody in. I mean, Mayorkas was quoted not that long ago saying that north of 85% of everybody that they encounter at the border gets let in. That's unprecedented.
Mm.
And I would say it's probably closer to 95 or even a 98%
Except
in the
for
high
Ellis
90s.
Island, they used to let everybody in back in the day.
Yeah, but in its day, Ellis Island was a legal system. I mean, if you had the wrong disease or something, you got sent back. You
Mm.
still had to be invited in, approved, and then let in. But in those days, that was the system.
Mm.
It's considerably more complex now that we've advanced in modernity and our economy and everything. We don't need to settle the West so much.
And
And
if Ecuador and Chile and places like that are accepting almost 100% of the people, why don't they just stay there?
well, millions of them did during the Trump administration.
Mm.
The Haitians, especially, they stayed for years in Chile. But why are you leaving now? Well, the answer is because they're letting us in now.
It makes sense because we've got Haiti, obviously not going through a very good time right now, and you could make an argument. It's unsafe for people to stay there. Not a difficult argument. Why are Chinese people coming in droves?
Well, let me just start first by saying I've met lots of Chinese, but I've never managed to get any of them to agree to try to be interviewed on one of those translation apps. Just recently, I was in Colombia, and I was hanging out with some UN people that are dealing with Chinese all the time in this area, in a
Mm.
town called Nicoclí. And they told me that all of the Chinese they see are very wealthy. They have unlimited cash. It's all US dollars. I think most of them are lifestyle pursuers who just want to live in the United States because, like, who doesn't?
So they're looking
They'll
to
be
turn themselves into somebody, and then they turn themselves into Border Patrol, get processed, and then let out into America.
Yeah, yeah. The vast majority of immigrants that have come in on this thing, they turn themselves in because they know that the policy is that Border Patrol has to release them. That to me is the definition of an open border. That everybody that you apprehend, I'll put that in air quotes, it gets let in.
And that's a
Now,
new policy?
yeah, we have not had anything like this, certainly not at this scale,
Mm-hmm.
for this long a period of time, and as a purposeful matter of policy
Mm.
ever in U.S. history. Nothing like this. This is a really unusual social experiment that we've tried out here.
And so when you say social experiment, what do you mean?
Well, I mean, it's a euphemism. I mean,
Right.
I don't think it's
It's
somebody's
not a
actually doing
conscious. It's not
it.
a conscious social experiment.
Yeah, I mean, it's just that it's never happened before. And
Right.
so in that way, it's kind of experimental. Hey, let's see what happens if we let 10 million people in as fast as we can let them in, any way we can get them
And
in.
why do you think that's happening?
My theory about it, and I think it's supported, is that because of Donald Trump, 4 years with him having immigration crackdown as his, central policy, that there was an equal reaction on the other side, on the far liberal, progressive part of the spectrum, of the political spectrum that says we're going to do the exact opposite of what he did and as robustly and forcefully as we can. There was a very, very powerful, uh, far left uprising about immigration. And those people got into power and inhabited the advisory staffs of the White House, the Domestic Policy Council, the State Department, all the agencies of DHS, USCIS, et cetera. And they put these policies in place. It was like a dream list. It just was what was necessary to emerge from the soup of 15 candidates, right? And then to finally take that support and win and beat Donald Trump. And they had to be rewarded. I go one bit farther than just merely ideology. I think it has a lot to do with money. A lot of the people that came in as advisors came directly from the migrant advocacy organizations, from the NGOs that do this work, that do this business, and that get grant money and federal contracts to manage it when the numbers get really big. It just so happens that those advisors from those organizations were the architects of these policies that actually were carried out. And now those NGOs and UN agencies are reaping just incredibly vast fortunes in tax money and grants. One of the things that is happening here and all along the migrant trail that led here and beyond all the way up to the border is that the United Nations is handing out cash and debit cards and movement assistance to immigrants to help sustain them on their road. What do you expect to get from this place?
Bueno, me hablaron de una ayuda económica y
They offer financial
estoy
help,
viendo la posibilidad de obtenerla.
and I'm seeing the possibility of getting that financial help.
It's what Eisenhower warned about with the military-industrial complex getting a hold of foreign policy. They make all the tanks and bombs and weapons and get rich doing it when there's a war on. So if they get control of foreign policy, then we'll always be at war. Well, it happened in this space that the architects of this policy are now in control of the policy, and their organizations are becoming fabulously wealthy. And I think that's a big part of this too.
So I want to build on that. That's a very interesting point. So Eisenhower, I love that quote, by the way. Eisenhower is saying if foreign policy gets taken over by the military-industrial complex, it's in their best interest to get rid of planes and tanks and guns, so they're going to have wars, so you get rid of them, so you have to buy more of them. It makes sense. Big pharma, obviously. There's a lot of, let's say, collusion between the people who make the policy and then afterwards the people who reap the rewards. We're going to do a show on that. But I've never heard it in the case of immigration, of, the people who were at the NGOs, et cetera, got into power, made the policy that sort of I wash your back, you wash mine. Do you have any names or instances of that?
Susan Pope is a good one. She was in the administration. She's now the head of the United Nations Office International Migration.
And they give money to refugees?
And well, they directly do, but they also dole it out to all the NGOs.
Okay.
They are running it alongside UNHCR. Alejandro Mayorkas himself, the DHS secretary, was on the board of directors for HIAS, which is one of the biggest of the NGOs. You see them everywhere down there, and flooded with U.S. taxpayer cash through the United Nations, and it's very incestuous. All of this is very incestuous. He had to resign from the board, obviously, when he took over DHS. I'll be watching when he leaves to see what position he takes afterwards, because I guarantee it's going to be a big one somewhere.
Trump said, okay, we're going to deport 15, 20 million people. How does that work?
Well, I think that Trump will have no problem at all sewing up the border and reducing illegal immigration flow by 90%. I think that'll happen within an hour.
Wow.
There are very specific things that can be done. They undid what he had in place in an hour, and by the next hour they were pouring through. And I think he'll have no problem sewing up the border. He knows exactly what to do because he did it already and it worked. But he's going to have a bigger problem, I think, doing mass deportations because for a variety of reasons. But politically, it's going to be a terrible show. You're going to have children. I mean, huge numbers of this mass migration population in this event were children. The local TV cameras will be out when the ICE thugs are rounding up little children who are crying and screaming for mommy, right? That's the sort of thing you're going to have when he starts to do that. It'd be like, think back to the kids in cages controversy, what that was like. Well, this is going to be that in by magnitudes. The other thing is that there are 10 million of them. There are just, you have 6,000 ICE agents that are deportation officers. And I just don't know how they're going to tackle that size of a population. I mean, that's LA and Chicago all together.
I mean, economically, it would be devastating. I think, 15 million people, et cetera. I mean, this is going to have widespread repercussions. But it seems crazy that on one side, you have just, okay, open border, let everybody in, and here's our policy. And on the other side, it's not only do we close the border, we kick everybody inside of America out. I mean, it seems, like, is there no sane middle ground?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of where we are. The American people are polling pretty consistently as they want illegal immigrants who got in and stayed in illegally to leave. There is a bit of a mandate for the Republicans to do this.
What President Trump has seen right here is he's seen how his policies have worked, but he's also seen how he can expand upon those policies once he goes back into the White House.
Brandon Judd is here with us today. Thank you for joining us. I'm just going to
Good to be with you.
Thank you. I'm gonna just read this with my glasses because you've got a long pedigree here. National Border Patrol Council, so the NBPC is the labor union representing approximately 18,000 Border Patrol agents and support staff. You were the president up until recently when you retired, so you are an expert on all things border. You've been vocal about the issues that are happening there, so we're very excited to have you on with us today.
Well, it's good to be with you. I really appreciate it.
So maybe let's just start with the differences between President Trump when he was president and President Biden, the difference between quote unquote closed borders and open borders.
When we talk about an open border, a closed border, what we're looking at is how many people are able to make it into the United States. These people that cross our borders illegally, their intent is to make it into the United States. And right now what's happening is when people cross the borders illegally, we take them into custody. Border Patrol agents take them into custody. We process them, and then we turn around and release them into the United States. So all we are is a door that they cross through. We take them, and then we process them and release them into the United States. To us, that is the definition of an open border. If you look at what our laws say that if you do not have a right to be here, you shall be removed. That's the word that's used, shall. And we're not removing these individuals. These individuals do not have a legitimate claim to be here in the United States. We're just ultimately releasing them. So they are getting exactly what they want. And to us, that is the definition of an open border. We're not removing people. We're releasing them into the United States.
So an open border means that they come in, they get processed, but they get to stay in the States. And before, it was if they tried to come in and we caught them, we would send them back to Mexico while they got processed. So that's the big difference, is waiting in Mexico versus waiting in America.
Yeah, whether we send them back to Mexico or whether we send them back to their home country, we were actually effectuating removals. And right now we're not doing that. So to us, again, like you just stated, that is to us an open border.
Okay, so why did that change?
It's simply policy. This isn't a political issue to me. It's not a political issue to Border Patrol agents. What we want to do is we want to be able to secure the American border. We want to be able to protect the American public. And we just can't do that right now. And that's simply because policies change. From day one, when President Biden went into office, he abolished all of the policies that allowed us to remove people. He then institutionalized the release of people into the United States. The why, I have my opinions on why he did that. And my opinion is because that's what his base wants. His base does want an open border. They've clamored for that for many, many years. I believe that's the reason why. But regardless of what the reason is what he's actually done. And what he's done is he's effectuated the release of millions of people into the United States who do not have a legitimate claim to be here.
If you look at some of the research that we've done, what happened was people used to come in, get caught, sent back to Mexico while they awaited their processing. Then Mexico said, no, we're not going to allow you to do that because it's unconstitutional for non-Mexicans to wait in Mexico. Now, if that happens, it's become sort of an international issue. What do you say to that?
Well, that's when the State Department has to step in. And that's why we look at, even though President Biden did not use the term border czar, you have to have somebody that's above the department level people, the secretaries, the cabinet levels. You have to have the State Department step in and regulate that. But the truth is Mexico did allow remain in Mexico while President Trump was in office. The moment President Trump left office, of course, they changed their tune. When you look at the billions of dollars that criminal cartels generate by smuggling people into the United States, those dollars go right back into the Mexican economy. The reason why President Trump was successful is because he threatened tariffs that were greater than the amount of money that the cartels were able to make. And when he threatened those tariffs, Mexico complied and did what I believe is the right thing to do, which is allow people. They've allowed them into their country. They should also allow them to wait in Mexico pending the adjudication of all of their asylum claims.
And that's become a big issue, the adjudication of asylum claims, because to go back to it, there's an open border versus closed border. So you get caught, you get sent back to Mexico in the old days, waiting for your adjudication. Here now you're in America, and there's adjudication. Now, the stats we're trying to get down, and maybe you could help us with that. Some people are saying 80% of the people show up for their adjudication, and there are stats on the other side saying that up to 90% of the people just don't show up at all. What do you know anything about?
I do. And the problem with those stats is they're not talking about. So when I talk about the number of people that actually show up, I'm talking about to their final deportation proceeding. The vast majority of the people that we take into custody and we release into the United States, they'll show up to their appointments. And that's what the left likes to tout. They say, well, they're showing up to their appointments. They show up to their appointments because they receive benefits based upon making those appointments, whether it's work permits, whether it's a legal status to be able to be here to claim Social Security or certain benefits. That's what they show up to their appointments for. But once it comes down to their final deportation proceeding, that's when the vast majority of people don't show up. That's the reason that we have millions upon millions of people in the United States right now, is because they're not showing up to their court appearance. From my understanding and talking with Tom Homan, who was the acting director of ICE under President Trump, now those numbers are close to 90% that do not show up to their court appearances. And the reason that they're not showing up is because the burden of proof to remove these individuals is not on the federal government. This is not a criminal case. So we don't have the burden of proof. The burden of proof is on these individuals to show that they have a legitimate claim to asylum to be here in the United States. That is a very high bar, and very few people can meet that bar. Therefore, they just abscond, disappear into what President Obama termed the shadows of society. Again, that's the reason that we have millions of people here in the United States that are illegal.
And what the high bar of being legal, leading to millions of people being illegal, what is that bar, for example, to come here legally?
So you have to prove that if you remain in your country, you're going to be persecuted, you're going to be tortured, you're going to be pressed into indentured servitude. That's the high bar. And when you look at these countries, when you look at the murder rates in these countries, most of these countries have lower murder rates than Chicago. They just don't meet that threshold to be able to show that if I stay in my country, I am going to be persecuted, or I am going to be physically harmed, or I'm going to be pressed into indentured servitude. Those bars are very, very high to meet. The simple fact of the matter is very few people are actually persecuted in these countries. They're dangerous countries. We know that. The vast majority of people are coming here because they have a better life here. They can work, whereas there aren't very many jobs in their home country. But economic security is not a legitimate claim to asylum.
What is the open border base? Why would you want an open border, for example? What is the philosophy?
Frankly, you have both the radical right and left in this country. We're going to discuss open border. We're going to discuss the radical left. The radical left does not like necessarily what our democracy is. They want to take us to socialism. They know that the more people that they get into the country, the more that the Supreme Court ruled just a couple of years ago that it doesn't matter what your status is. If you're in the United States, you will be counted towards census. And if you count those individuals towards census, then you have a better chance of maintaining political power. And that's exactly what the open border base wants. All you have to do is listen to Bernie Sanders, listen to Elizabeth Warren. That's what they're pushing
how
for.
does
That's
the
where they want to go.
how does the census lead to socialism?
So the census allows states like California to create additional congressional districts. By creating additional congressional districts, you have a better chance of maintaining power. So when you look at the majority of these people that are coming to the United States illegally, they are going to generally what is considered blue states. California, New York, Illinois, that's where the vast majority of these individuals are going to. And by going to those individual states, you create additional congressional districts. And we know by history that when you create additional congressional districts in blue states, those are going to be Democrat controlled positions.
I mean, speaking as an immigrant myself, it was hard to get citizenship, and it's a long process to vote. And when we looked into that, because we said, okay, well, one of the theories is, okay, they have open borders to get more voters because those voters will vote Democrat, but it takes years to become, to even have your case adjudicated, and then it gets adjudicated. If it's not adjudicated, you can't vote. There's nowhere really except for D.C. where you can vote, and that's only in local elections. There's no state or federal. So is this a proposed future thing? Like they're going to come in and then get these new congressional districts and then be allowed to vote? Because as of today, you can't.
It's certainly possible that that's what the intent is. Again, you pass law. The Congress passes laws, and the more you have that are for the open borders, the more the more likely that we're going to have what's considered an amnesty. All we have to do is listen to all of the rhetoric coming from the left. They constantly talk about amnesty. Every single time you hear immigration reform, that is an amnesty. And if they were able to get these millions of people citizenship, then you would create a voter base that would be gigantic, that would be nearly impossible for conservatives to overcome. So again, just listen to what they say, look at what that would mean, and it clearly means immigration reform to them is amnesty. It's not border security. I haven't seen a legislative package put together by the Democrats, solely by the Democrats, that has border security. It's all about amnesty, legalizing those individuals that are here illegally.
Don't we need immigration for, if you look at what's happening with Japan, the aging population, they don't have enough people working, there's stagflation, et cetera, et cetera. We need people to work. Whenever you talk to anybody, they talk about the people who come across, to work in seasonal work, et cetera, et cetera. If you shut down the borders, isn't it harmful?
No, what we're looking at illegal versus legal immigration. Everybody that I know is for legal immigration.
Right.
Everybody that I know is for potential seasonal work permits. The problem is you can't start there. You have to start with border security first, because until you secure the border, you're just never going to be able to get to the other end. I'm talking about seasonal work permits. The legal immigration, we still continue to do that. We are the most generous country in the entire world. On average, we allow 1 million legal immigrants to come to our country that potentially could get citizenship down the road. So we continue to push for legal immigration. It's illegal immigration that we want to stop. And once we can stop and control that, then you can start to expand out. You can start to look at guest worker permits. You can start looking at agricultural permits, all of those different permits. But as long as we continue to inundate ourselves with illegal immigration, we're never going to be able to get there.
Okay, so that leads to a follow-up question, which is, we're failing at illegal immigration. Is that yes?
It is, absolutely.
Okay. How do we fix it?
You have to take it at a holistic approach. What you have to do is you have to be able to adjudicate these cases immediately, and we can do that. We have the resources to do it right now. You just have to have the political will to do it. You can go back to policies like Remain in Mexico, because Remain in Mexico was like a light switch. The moment that policy was implemented, we saw illegal immigration drop to 45-year lows. So there are policies that can be put into place that would control illegal immigration. And like I said before, once you control that, then you can expand out from there. But you have to control illegal immigration first. We have the policies to do it. We just don't have the political will with this administration to do it.
My last question would be, if you had your druthers, if this was you, if you were the border czar, what would be your top 5 things that you would implement right away?
Well, the first thing that I would do under this administration, I'm going to give you under their own parameters.
Great.
I would immediately start holding single adults in custody pending their adjudication. That adjudication could take place within a couple days. Once you clear out the single adults, then you can start holding family units. If somebody has a legitimate asylum claim, they should be allowed to be in the United States. If they don't, they should be removed. And that's what I would do. I would immediately remove people that do not have a legitimate claim to be here in the United States.
President-elect Donald Trump has vowed to get right to work. Trump is expected to issue executive orders to secure the border while enacting mass deportation to remove the millions of people illegally living in America.
Douglas Rivlin, thank you for being with us today.
Thanks for having me on.
We're very excited to talk to you. I just want to get to your bona fides, because a lot of times on the internet, you don't know who the hell you're talking to or what they do, or, Senior Director of Communication for America's Voice.
Yes.
Also Director of Communication at the National Immigration Forum, and Annenberg Public Policy Center. I want to say thanks, and also America's Voice, National Immigration Forum, Annenberg Public Policy Center. What do they do?
So America's Voice is a pro-immigrant advocacy organization that is coming from the progressive side. It is basically making the point that America has a pro-immigrant majority, and trying to activate that majority to fight for good policies. The National Immigration Forum was more of a left-right coalition back when this was a very bipartisan issue. So we had representatives from business and labor and church and grassroots, and lots of different people who participate in the immigration advocacy world in some form or fashion.
You said, when it was a bipartisan issue. So for the longest time, immigration has been a bipartisan issue. Why has it become so partisan, and why has it become such a political hot button, maybe the hot button of this election?
Well, it really became partisan around the time of President Obama's election. If you go back to 1984, it was, the pro-immigrant candidate was Ronald Reagan.
President Reagan did sign the sweeping new Immigration Reform Act today. Millions of illegal aliens will be eligible for amnesty and will be able to apply for legal residency status, no questions asked.
So it's completely flipped. It went through a bipartisan period where not all of the Democrats supported immigration and not all of the Republicans did, but the winning majority was a combination of Democrats and Republicans. And that's when you had John McCain working with Ted Kennedy and my boss, Luis Gutierrez, working with Jeff Flake. Around the time Obama came in, the Democrats became much more pro-immigrant. You started to see votes where you'd have 100% of the senators voting on what I would consider to be the right side of issues. And you still had about a third of the Republicans, but the party became very anti-Obama, and the real partisan flip started to happen on immigration. So even leaders like John Boehner and Paul Ryan, who were inclined to be pro-immigrant Republicans from the Midwest, they could not get through their caucus in the House pro-immigrant legislation, and that's where legislation ended up dying.
Because of we're not going to give Obama one vote, that kind of thing.
That was a big part of it. And it just became toxic within Republican circles to be bipartisan on almost any issue.
Yeah.
We all laud bipartisanship,
Yeah.
but it's not rewarded by the voters in the Republican Party, and not that much by the Democrats either.
Yeah, I did a documentary on the last 6 months of Obama's presidency with Speaker Boehner, and that he got ousted by his own party for even going to meet Obama. So
went down to the White House and snuck into the White House. I couldn't walk in because you walk into the White House, the right-wing press goes, "Oh, what's he up to?" Right. The left-wing press, "Oh, what's the president up to?" Everybody goes crazy.
There was almost a deal that year that Boehner left, and it got spiked by the nativists within the Republican Party who went after Cantor and took his seat in the primary.
Yeah, two things very interesting there. The spiritual center of the Republican Party for the longest time was Reagan and his legacy. There's none more Reagan than me kind of thing was the chant of the Republican Party. Up now it's Trump. But the other thing you said, which is interesting, is the pro-immigration majority. Do you speak on that a little bit? Because if you look, which we have at online, the immigration, the noise is incredible.
The consensus has been there really since 2000, when I started working on these issues. About 2/3 of the country thinks that we should be working towards legal status for the 10 million people who live here without legal status. That is a smart next step. We're not going to deport 10 million people. It's not going to happen.
The 2/3, that's what polling?
Yeah, I mean, pretty consistently, and you look at the Gallup poll over the years, if you look at network polling, when you poll on should we allow undocumented immigrants to come forward and go through a process and earn legal status, the answer is 60, 70, sometimes up to 80%. Should we allow illegal immigration? That's always negative, and it's always, the American people don't support that. Mm-hmm. What they want to have is a controlled and orderly system. So the Republicans, I think, have been able to make the issue about the border, and they win in that territory because it looks like we don't have an orderly system. But what it's really masking is that we have support for a legal immigration system, and most of the country supports the idea of legal immigration. But Republicans are really opposed to that. And ever since sort of the MAGA movement has taken over, I think the play has been to try and derail any kind of reform of our immigration system. Our economy's grown a great deal since the 90s. Our immigration system hasn't changed since then. But the goal is to make legal immigration as difficult as possible and impossible for most people, and then to rail against the illegalities. The reality is that, a lot of rational people look at the United States, and the only door that's open is to come to the border and try to ask for asylum. And we really should have a more rational immigration system. We should have a system that doesn't involve walking across Mexico and hoping that you can use the asylum system That's not the purpose of our asylum system.
Right.
But it's become the only door.
It's the default.
Because so many of these other doors are shut or are just so long that it's not practical to even think about going through them. We should be thinking about ways to manage immigration with visas and control as opposed to trying to suppress it.
So why has this become, let's say, the number one political hot button in this electoral cycle? It seems like the Obama administration was, you're not going to get one of my votes. We used to be bipartisan and now. But why immigration specifically?
It's where the MAGA movement is getting its oxygen, right? I mean, it is the driving message for the MAGA movement. And that means that you can't run in a primary and not be a nativist in the Republican Party at this point. This kind of rhetoric, believing that there's a plot to import immigrants as voters to undermine white America, is very broadly held within the Republican Party these days, and it used to be sort of a fringe conspiracy theory.
I wanted to get into that, both of those points actually. The so-called replacement theory, which I think a lot of people talk about, but don't understand. So I want to get into that. And also, there's this given that you can just, we're opening the borders, quote unquote, to so that we can get, a whole new voting base, for the Democratic Party. So I want to talk about that. But if you could start with replacement theory and what it actually means.
So it's been around for a long time. It's got its roots in sort of an anti-Semitic nationalist view, not just in this country, but in Europe as well. And, the idea is there's a boardroom somewhere in New York where elites and Jews are plotting to bring in voters to undermine white America. Politicians in particular, and news media, I mean, there's, Fox Network and Breitbart are dedicated to, fomenting this anti-immigration feeling that there's an elite that's plotting against you, and you as the American taxpayer are being taken advantage of. And it's those guys, the immigrants, they're very willing to go point at.
Which has been a political tactic since there were politics, like, it's those guys to blame, therefore, we're going to get rid of them and we're going to make your life better. So how is this rhetoric, especially about sort of, we let immigrants in and by the way, then they can vote and somehow, and by the way, this is widely accepted, that they can come in and it's voting and we have to stop, the immigration, so we stop the voting. Why do you think that's taking on such traction and people believe it so readily?
It's always been a fear, and they have been a lot of studies and there are a lot of laws, and it just doesn't happen very often. There is no organized plot that I've ever heard of or seen or been made aware of to try and get people who are not eligible to vote. But there's a big push in state houses and at the federal level to have laws to make you prove your citizenship to vote. And the goal there is to prevent certain citizens from voting, because if you require that, it's going to weed out some people and not others. It's going to weed out older people. It's going to weed out people of color. It's going to weed out poorer people. And those are folks that Republicans would just as soon not have vote.
So basically, and I'm trying to drum down to it, we're saying, okay, since the 90s, it hasn't really changed. Legal immigration.
We have 5,000 visas for low-skilled workers for the entire country for the entire year.
Right.
And that is, just set aside for low-skill workers or, folks that we would think of as not high school or not college educated.
Right.
And that's not enough for, Washington, D.C., where I am, or Los Angeles, certainly not enough for half of Los Angeles where you are.
So you talked about just then about, okay, so, there's people who are saying, well, kick the illegal immigrants out. Obviously, that's a huge undertaking. There's a lot of them. Some have been here a long time. Some were born here. Some
most 80% have been here since before 2010.
There you go. So 80%.
So again, this is much more about symbolism and politics than it is about reality. If Americans like people to follow the law, and I'm one of them.
Yeah.
But the law is real. The story the Republicans are telling is these are bad people violating good laws, and I think the reality is much closer to these are good people who are caught in a system of bad laws that don't give them many options. And certainly there are probably some bad people among them, but by and large, we should have an immigration system with visas that allows us to weed folks out.
And how viable do you think it would be to, for example, send back, the quote-unquote illegal immigrants in America?
I think it would be an economic disaster and a community disaster everywhere. And what Trump and Stephen Miller are talking about is recruiting local police and National Guard from red states where you have governors that agree with them to go into blue states and remove, go through neighborhoods and remove people. I don't think that's going to work out very well in Pennsylvania if the Alabama National Guard shows up. It's impractical. But secondly, it's shooting yourself in the foot. Why do we want to remove that many consumers and workers from our economy? We don't. That hurts our economy. It hurts jobs for Americans, right? Because we have fewer people creating jobs, fewer people creating commerce, and fewer taxes paid. That doesn't help the American worker. That hurts them.
We're a nation of immigrants, but we have never, ever, ever been comfortable with the ones currently streaming across our borders.
All right, here we are, Nick Gillespie, Libertarian journalist, editor-at-large for Reason, which is the biggest Libertarian magazine. We've had people from the right, people from the left, we've had border agents, we've had everybody talking about this, but we had to get a Libertarian. I gotta say this because it's so cool. Nick Gillespie is to libertarianism what Lou Reed is to rock and roll, the quintessence of its outlaw spirit, from the New York Times Magazine. That's pretty good stuff, my friend.
It is. When I first heard that, I am to libertarian what Lou Reed is to rock and roll, which is dead, right?
Well, I just like to say quintessence.
Yes. Yeah. No, that's
Hamlet.
It's very flattering. That's a flattering comparison.
What is this quintessence of dust? Man delights me, no woman neither. All right, here we are. I saw your debate on immigration and was fascinated by a lot of the stuff that you talked about.
The majority of people in the country illegally don't bum rush their way across the southern border. They come here legally and then don't leave. That's why South Asian Indians are the third largest illegal people who are illegal in America. Is that your vision of an illegal immigrant?
There's these open border memes and gates opening up and, hundreds of people running across, which obviously have been doctored or made up, or they're in different places, or all these things. But I wanted to get more to the macro, or at least start with the macro, because this election, immigration's arguably the number one touch point. So we're going to get into that, but let's get into the history. I wonder if you could give us a history lesson on immigration. America is a nation of immigrants, but it's sort of not the ones coming in now. The old ones are okay.
Yeah, and there's a great meme called Schrodinger's Immigrant, like Schrodinger's cat. Simultaneously, the immigrants are coming here to live off welfare, and they're coming here to steal your jobs. And what's interesting about it is that anxiety and that fear is also wedded directly to the celebration of America as something like a melting pot, a phrase that came into circulation in the late 19th century.
And I think that this is it's interesting. Even within this debate, it was sort of like the last immigration, or over the past sort of recent history, has been Mexican in nature. And now the new wave is, well, they're coming from Sudan and Chad, they're coming from Benin, they're coming from China.
And if I may, I mean,
Yeah.
the three biggest countries of immigrants who are currently in, recorded in the country, it's Mexico, then China and India. And India and China are picking up. So we used to think about those people, on the boat coming into New York Harbor, looking at the Statue of Liberty. And those are all people, that I was going to say that we recognize as, super Americans now, Jews and Italians and Irish, and then it became Mexicans. But in fact, increasingly now it's going to be South Asian Indians and East Asian Chinese.
Why is it so hot right now? I mean, it just seems to have taken off.
Yeah, I think it's, a mixture of many different factors. First and foremost, it does have to do with broad-based economic anxiety. I'm a big believer in ubiquitous surveillance techniques. The fact that everybody has a camera now, you can, instead of surveillance, which is, people looking from above, surveillance means we all can report on what we see all the time, and we can send it out to the world via social media. Generally speaking, it's very liberatory, but social media also allows for these intense, spectacle-driven news cycles where we see things like immigrants rushing across the border. And I'm not a Republican or a Democrat, but Donald Trump, kind of oddly in 2016, he said immigration was the big issue, and he really put it on the table in a spectacular way. And
with the build a wall.
Yeah, and if I guess actually, when you think about it, it had been bubbling along. If we're trying to be fully nuanced about this, George W. Bush in 2004 won, re-election with, very easily over John Kerry, and he said, "I have two priorities. One is privatizing parts of Social Security, and the other was I'm going to do comprehensive immigration reform." And he got smacked down by Democrats and Republicans. Democrats traditionally have been against large-scale immigration because they believe that it undermines workers' wages, particularly union wages. And then Republicans, the small business faction of the Republican Party, likes having a lot of people coming in and a lot of workers that they can use that are not unionized. But then there's also a strong nativist dimension, which has been growing in the Republican Party. We go through these phases of nostalgia for immigration and then kind of anger and anxiety over it. And we have been, for most of this century, have been in a hype cycle that immigration is out of control and that it's dangerous and it's destroying what is unique and particular about America. And ironically, what is unique and interesting about America is that we are a nation of immigrants, but never the ones who are showing up at our door right now.
Make immigration great again. So, in saying that, there used to be like a fringe of the Republican Party, and we shot them in Charlottesville famously. Jews will not replace us! There's this replacement theory.
Yep.
The old immigration is fine, but the new immigration is bad. Maybe you could explain, what is the theory and where does it come from?
In America, the great replacement theory, the way that it typically gets talked about, and people like Tucker Carlson, are one of the sources of kind of promulgating this a lot, is the idea that the Democratic Party typically is either bringing in large numbers of immigrants or in its more sinister kind of variations, is going to legalize currently illegal immigrants who will then become voters for the Democratic Party and pass massive, will turn America into the very same shithole that people leave and enter America legally to escape. The fear of these people coming in and then kind of attempting some kind of coup is long-lived. And it's particularly dominant now among certain aspects of the right. The other thing that is interesting about this, and you mentioned, the debate that I was in with Ann Coulter, she explicitly traffics in this type of rhetoric that, people fleeing Venezuela, for instance, they are coming here in order to create socialism in America, the very socialism that they're leaving. And to go back to that good immigrant, bad immigrant dichotomy, you never hear anybody say, you know, those people who swam across shark-infested waters to escape Castro, they don't come here to vote for, you know, gold-plated socialism, right?
Yeah.
They become rock-ribbed Republicans. So there's, you know, there's not a lot of coherence in the replacement theory models.
But speaking of coherence, when I first came down here as an immigrant, I studied politics and economics. So I remember looking at Clinton's government, and they had taken the largest deficit of all time by fiscal responsibility, turned it into the largest surplus of all time, reduced government, et cetera, et cetera. And then, you know, Bush gets in and takes the biggest surplus, deficit, increases the government, et cetera, et cetera. Literally, the platforms of both parties have been switched, and no one, that's not what's surprising. What's surprising is nobody said boo.
Well, and if I may also point out, you know, in 1996, when Bill Clinton was running for re-election, he spent more time railing against the specter of illegal immigration and how he was going to find the illegals and kick them out of the country in a way that even Republicans were like, what? This is insanity.
Not only in the states most heavily affected, but in every place in this country are rightly disturbed by the large numbers of illegal aliens entering our country. The jobs they hold might otherwise be held by citizens or legal immigrants. The public service they use impose burdens on our taxpayers. That's why our administration has moved aggressively to secure our borders more by hiring a record number of new border guards.
You look at what's happened here, and the Democrats, because the unions were their base, they were, you know, anti, and then Republicans like Reagan were very pro. The Republicans have gone this way. They went away from Reagan. The Democrats have gone away from Bubba, and everybody's gone to the different side. And again, no one said boo.
You know, this is, I mean, when we talk about ideology, I think this does come down to, you know, that question of really in many ways since Ronald Reagan, there has not been somebody who has even really gestured in a powerful way with any, you know, kind of actual clarity or filled in details, a vision of an America, you know, that is forward looking and is capacious and is able to bring in people and keep going and change, but also be recognizably American. When he talked, you know, about a shining city on a hill and whatnot, and he, you know, he really meant that. And we have the United States, I think, in a profound way. You can see this on the left. We've lost trust and faith in our institutions and our history. The left, broadly speaking, you know, and this is a cartoon, but I think there's accuracy in it. The left looks at America and only sees a country that was built, you know, on slavery and is immoral and corrupt in all of its particulars, and there's no way really to fix it. And the right has this, in, you know, very narrow view of when America was great, and it was, you know, a place when there were only, you know, the wide range of ethnicities will allow some Irish, will allow some Irish Catholics, but let's not get crazy with this. And as a result, they can't deal with modernity, but we're stuck, you know, between a, you know, I don't know, Dracula versus the Wolfman fighting, and, you know, nobody with a vision for what's America going to look like, you know, 50 years from now without being terrified. By what that looks like.
Which brings me to my next point. I wanted to go back. We talked about the economy. Look at Japan. I mean, Japan is, you know, the yen is at an all-time low. You know, their economy is halving. It's, you know, but the people are dying and not being replaced. Speaking of replacement theory, they want replacement theory. They're trying to encourage people to come. So this is all tied to the economy, and people are like, yep, and they cluck like hens. Yes, that's true. Oh God, yes, you know, we're not having enough babies. And then you say, okay, immigration, well, you can't let anybody in. So they don't seem to be logically, you know, dovetailing there.
No, not at all. And you'll see that in, you know, states in the United States that are losing population, you know, tend to be hostile to immigrants or to newcomers. You know, you can't have it both ways. The fact is that birth rates are falling all over the world as economies develop, as people get wealthier, and particularly as women have more equality in, in every aspect of human activity, they have fewer kids. This is essentially an ironclad law. And the way that we can maintain, population growth, which is tied to economic growth and kind of increased standards of living, you're going to be doing it through immigration. And you can either see that as a good thing or a bad thing.
A lot we've talked about with other people has been, there's asylum law, which, asylum for people who, there's a hurricane or there's a war in the Ukraine or something happening. Okay, that's what it's designed for. It's not designed for people who are saying, okay, I'm coming because I want to have a better life for my family and I want to make money. And if you look at that and say, okay, well, everyone's coming under asylum laws because it's the only way you can really do it.
Right.
So how do you actually fix this issue so that it's bipartisan and it sticks, number one? And number two is, do we have any hope of actually controlling a border?
Asylum rules and refugee rules should be for very specific circumstances. And the United States, I think, also has a moral responsibility to, places like Afghanistan and Iraq and other parts of the world that we have, we went in and we busted up a lot of stuff. And we have a very clear responsibility to bring people in under refugee or asylum laws if we were prime movers in why they have to get out of their country in the first place. But we need to be doing that on a tighter basis, and we need to be doing that in ways in which you can start that process in the sender countries and things like that, so that you don't have chaos at the border. I mean, at the southern border, it is not good to see what is happening there. And this is one of the problems, is that Congress is not yet at a place where they are willing to actually have serious conversations about this, because everything is so politicized. Nobody wants to give in on anything. The other thing, though, the larger question about can we really control the border? We need to recognize that, border crossings are not necessarily where most illegal immigrants come in. Generally speaking, about half, sometimes a majority of illegals come into the country legally. They come in through student visas or work visas or tourist visas, and they overstay. So what we could do to, make it easier to deal with the people who come here is to make it easier for people to come here legally. There has not been comprehensive immigration reform since the late 80s. We need something like that. There are something like a backlog of 9 million people waiting for green cards. Everybody who tries to enter the country through legal means will tell you that it is haphazard, it is awful, it is expensive, and it's going to create all kind of weird black markets in people and goods and services that cause many more problems than they solve.
Hasn't that already happened, though?
Yeah, it has to a large degree. And this is why, coming up with an immigration reform that would be something like an Ellis Island for the 21st century, let more people come in legally, that would alleviate a lot of the problems at choke points like the southern border and things like that.
So why do you think it doesn't happen?
Because the status quo serves the, both parties. This is something that is ultimately going to be fixed at the federal level. And it behooves the Republican Party to have things the way they are, and it behooves the Democratic Party to have things the way they are. I'm the grandchild of immigrants. All four of my grandparents showed up in the U.S. in the 19-teens from Ireland on my father's side and Italy on my mother's. And so I'm like a super American, right? I love America. I think America is an exceptional country. And in many ways, the way we're most exceptional is the way that we've accepted immigration. And we used to be at least confident that people would show up in America and they would become American, and they would also change America a little bit. So, before 1930 or 1945, pizza was not a big deal. Somehow Italian cooking became the basic American cuisine. Sure. And now it's being displaced by Mexican cuisine, which is kind of nice, see like tomato sauce lose, its condiment crown to
Salsa.
salsa or something like that. That is what is great about America, that we both acculturate to new people and we assimilate to new people. And the reason I talk about this is because we are, particularly nativists, are taking on a European view of immigration where citizenship and national identity and character is very rooted in terroir and kind of blood and soil. And we have always rejected that. And, it strikes me as like a fundamental mistake. And I am tempted on a certain level, although, a little bit hesitant to say that this may be a boomer generation problem. The baby boom, it grew up in an America that was uniquely homogenous. And that when you look at the inability of boomer politicians, and Reagan actually was a pre-boomer, boomer politicians have seemingly been incapable of solving this issue. And perhaps, millennials and Gen Z, who are much more diverse ethnically and demographically than boomers, they, something will shake free, and and they'll recognize that.
It's an interesting thing that, we're saying that maybe policy only changes with a changing demographic because it's more of a societal, cultural thing that's driven by economic necessity. But,
Right.
Trump, a lot of his appeal is he's your grumpy uncle at the country club, and everybody sort
And
of...
he totally changed the Republican Party in 2015, at least rhetorically, not in practice, but, stood for limited government,
Yeah.
open borders. It was pro-immigration, generally speaking, and things like
Yeah.
that. It is none of those things now. And so, that could change again.
Well, we know it's going to be interesting, and we know we're going to be talking to you about it because you're an interesting cat, but really interesting to talk to you. Thanks for your time, Nick Gillespie.
I appreciate that. Thanks very much.